I thought it was my destiny to be an art teacher. And that's when I realized that you don't choose your destiny. Destiny chooses you. And I guess that's the reason I became a professional investigator instead. It kind of made sense. One worked with the other. It happened. And I found myself every day working as an art teacher at Camden High School, and every evening going into the little office where my boyfriend and his partner were running a brand new detective agency. You see, they had just left the police department and they had just started their business. And so I did the real important things. I put stamps on the letters and I decorated the office and brought flowers in. I thought that would make a nice touch. It didn't really impress the clients that much because there were no clients yet. But they did important jobs. They did fender benders, you know, where people bump into each other and they have to investigate the accident. And they were really pretty depressed. But then they got their first domestic case. That means somebody was screwing somebody else's wife, okay? And they were all excited because they could do surveillance. This was a big thing for these guys. So every night I would go in and I would pretend not to be listening to them as they talked about the job. And their conversation went something like this. Okay, so he says his wife is cheating. Well, she's got to be cheating because she's not giving him any. She hasn't given him any for months. So there must be somebody else. And then there's a pause. Yeah, but there's nobody because she doesn't leave the damn house. So it's all in his mind. And we haven't seen anything. And all they did was bitch and moan. And it was awful. And they said, look, we're going to give it one more try. Tomorrow we'll go on surveillance again. Maybe we'll catch her doing something. Maybe she only goes out on Thursdays. Who knows? So I decided I'm going to go see what they're doing. Maybe a different set of eyes from a different perspective would be helpful. So I left school at lunchtime. Instead of eating lunch, I went out to their surveillance location, and this is what I saw. I saw two black men who had just come out of the police department, so they had military haircuts, sitting in an unmarked blue car in the middle of Cherry Hill, New Jersey, in a very exclusive neighborhood with mini mansions and Mercedes in the driveways. And they were wondering why the police kept checking them out and the neighbors were looking at them strangely. Well, duh. They looked like they were either undercover cops or that they were casing the area so that they could rob everybody. And they couldn't find anything. Of course they couldn't find anything. So they decided, my Batman and Robin, that they were going to take the next day off because they had worked really hard. They had done 4 days of surveillance, and they hadn't seen anything. So I took the day off, too, but I didn't tell them. And I dressed in a business suit, and I borrowed my mother's Cadillac, and I put on every piece of jewelry I owned. And I went to the neighborhood, and I parked my car conspicuously, and I walked up and down looking, and there was a house for sale over here. And here was the subject house. And directly across the street, every time I walked down the street, the window shades, the drapes, opened and then shut. And when I walked back, they opened and shut. Well, 20 minutes later, I was sitting in that house, talking to the lady who was peering out, the nosy neighbor, having coffee and finding out about the neighborhood. Because, you see, I told her I was married to a doctor and we were moving down from New York and we were looking at houses in the neighborhood, but I wanted to find out about the neighborhood. So she told me, Mr. Gordon walks around naked in his window. I like him. Mrs. Kaplan, she sneaks out, lets her dog poop on Mr. Gordon's front lawn, and she hides behind the rose bushes. Michael, the guy that delivers the paper, he throws Mrs. Kaplan's paper into the rose bushes because he knows that Mrs. Kaplan is hiding there watching her dog poop. So, I mean, she knew everything. And oh yeah, Mrs. Schwartz kisses her husband goodbye, puts her kids on the school bus, and a half an hour later, Mr. Finkel from next door goes out the back door, goes across the lawn, and goes into Mrs. Schwartz's house, and they have sex. How do I know? Because they go up into the bedroom and they leave the windows open. I know. And I looked at her and I said, and you watch all this? She said, hey, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just watching them do it. It's okay. And like clockwork, you can look at your watch. You know it's going to be every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I said thank you, because it was early. And I walked out, and I watched Mrs. Schwartz as she kissed her husband goodbye. And I watched Mrs. Schwartz as she put her kids on the bus. And I drove around the block, and I parked a block away behind the house. And I took pictures of the Schwartz and the Finkel tryst as he snuck out his back door, and he went across the garden, and he went into her back door, and he was there for 2 hours. And that night, I went into the office as usual, and I said hi to the guys. I said, what are you going to do about the job? They said, we'll think of something, we'll think of something. And I sat down, and I typed up my report. And I gave it to them, and I watched their faces, and that was the beginning. That was how I started my job as a professional investigator. I didn't go to school much after that. And I found my man that time, and I always find my man. And sometimes I find my woman, too. Thank you.